Good morning, Summer School Health. This is Mr. Schmidt coming at you with your first pre-recorded lesson of the week. We're going to talk about stress, one of the first things we usually cover in mental and emotional health. We're going to start with what is stress. So stress is an effect of a physical or psychological demand on our body. That could be in the form of something that we're doing, maybe a workout, or it could be in the form of maybe something we're having to deal with mentally, like the quarantine over the last 4 months or so, or something related to school, maybe something related to home, anything that puts extra like stress or a extra demand on a person, both physically or psychologically. Now, what causes a stress is a stressor. So this is the thing that makes us adapt or cope with that situation. So we had to adapt to a new normal with the quarantine. So that could be a form of a stressor for us. If maybe you like to work out, something along those lines, it could also be a form of a stressor. Anything that puts additional demands on a person's body and or makes us cope or adapt to a situation. So there are types of stress, all right? First one being eustress, which is a good form of it. I like to give the example of if you enjoy amusement parks or going to like Six Flags. As you're standing there in line waiting for the roller coaster, you're experiencing some form of eustress. It's good stress because you enjoy the ride, you just don't like the anticipation of waiting though. Distress or bad stress would be the same example I just gave of standing there in the line for people who don't enjoy roller coaster rides, like myself. So, good versus bad stress, we deal with both in our lives. It just really depends on the situation and then kind of how we view it. All right? Acute stress is temporary. This could be something as simple as you being anxious about maybe a test that's coming up in school or a summative assessment, or maybe you have to do some public speaking and you don't enjoy doing that. The last one is chronic stress, which is continuous stress, which can lead to exhaustion over a longer period of time. So this is something that if it is repeated over and over and over again, and our stress levels are elevated, even if it's just slightly, but slightly elevated over a longer period of time, that can become chronic stress. So our perception is a huge factor when we talk about stress. This is the way we react to the situation. Typically, this is based on a previous experience or our interests. So, for example, I am not a big roller coaster person. If for some reason my family, my friends take a trip to Six Flags, I'll go. But throughout the day, I'm usually pretty stressed about the different rides and things like that because I don't necessarily enjoy them. But I like to spend time with my friends and family, so you kind of have to take the good with the bad. All right, but our perception or how we view things is a huge factor when we talk about stress and the way we view the stress we're dealing with. So kinds of stressors. There are things like biological ones, meaning if we're injured, if we have a disability, if there's a mental or physical illness, all right, things that we have no control over, all right? Environmentally, very similar to biologically, are things we don't really have control over. As we age, we might have some, but typically we don't. These are things like crowding or noise, natural disasters, poverty, or pollution. Again, two big risk factors here that we really don't have a lot of control over, especially in our younger life. As we age, there are some other things that we typically look at, things like cognitive stressors, so our perception of different things that are going on. All right, our personal behavior. This is one that we have a huge impact on based on our day-to-day life. All right, so are we using illegal drugs? Are we using tobacco, alcohol, maybe not exercising or taking care of ourselves? All right, or life situations, which again, we really don't have a lot of control over those. All right, that could be a lot of different things, not just maybe some bigger stuff like that is listed here, or maybe death, or trouble at work, trouble at home, things along those lines. All right, but these are all different forms of stressors or things we have to cope with or adapt to the situation. So stages of stress. Fight or flight response. All right. Typically, when we are first stressed, our heart rate will speed up, our pupils will widen, all right, our muscles will tense up, and then our body starts to release fuel from the fat stores we have. All of this is to make sure our body is prepared to do one of two things: either fight whatever the stressor is or run and get away from it. All right. All of the things you see at the bottom of the page there start to change that are normally happening pretty regularly. Our body doesn't need to necessarily find a way to digest our breakfast or lunch if we're being put into a stressful situation. We typically don't need to look the prettiest, and our skin doesn't need to be perfect, so it will reduce the blood flow there, but it will push more energy to our muscles and our brain. All right, so all of this is kind of part of that fight or flight response. Different stages of stress here. Our body goes through these if we go right top to bottom. So first we get the alarm. Whatever that stress is, our body starts to release hormones like adrenaline to get us ready for whatever we need to do. After that, there's a little resistance. So we speed up our functioning. We find a way to make sure our body is going to perform at the optimal level so that we can do whatever is necessary to get out of the stressful situation. After that, we get into a recovery stage where the stress stops and our body then starts to feel the effects of it. Lastly, we get into exhaustion where our body starts to break down. So all of the different stress responses that we've been dealing with, our body hits that exhaustion stage and it needs to kind of rest and repair and prepare for kind of return to normal functioning. All right. So how do we improve phase 2? Well, typically we have to improve our overall physical activity and our physical health, right? The better in shape we are, the better off our body can prepare to hit that fight or flight response. And then also along with this, the faster we recover then from that experience, all right? If we're in better shape, our body can then respond and recover quicker. Stress on our body systems, all right? We're looking at 3 big ones. First one would be our nervous system. This starts the stress response and produces the reactions to not only put us into that fight or flight response, but also then to return us to normal. Secondly, our hormonal system is triggered by the nervous system, and it will bring on that stress response by releasing things like adrenaline or cortisol into our system. And lastly, our immune system. This is the body's main defense against disease, which we typically shut down during a stress response because we don't necessarily need to fight off a cold. We may need to fight off something else instead to keep ourselves alive and functioning, and then our body can return to normal immune system functioning. Long-term consequences. We look at things like our cardiovascular system, so our heart and our lungs. Typically with increased heart rate, we can damage our blood vessels. It can increase our blood pressure, which isn't necessarily the healthiest for us, all right? Our digestive system. Obviously, that shuts down for a period of time, so possibly if we're having chronic stress or that long-term stress, if our digestive system is not functioning properly, that can create issues as we start to break down our food and then find our way to store that energy. All right, and then our immune system. Again, if we're constantly in a state of stress, we will typically find a way to become sick a little bit quicker because our body's not fighting off simple things like the cold or maybe a headache, which can turn into other things. All right. If you think about as we get into the winter months and we're in school, if you have something going on that causes you to stress, maybe something at school, maybe something at home, or you're dealing with a different situation, usually as our body deals with that, and with us already living in the climate we do, we typically become sick a little bit easier. All right. So again, long-term consequences, some things that you can maybe relate to your own life. As we deal with stress, so how can we relieve it? Not moving through that slide, but we'll get into this one. So positive ways to deal with it. We can do things like physical activity. All right, maybe we go for a run, for a bike ride, walk our dog, spend a little time with friends. All right, we can manage our time better. If you procrastinate and put things off, find a way to deal with that right away instead of having to cram it all in at the end. Maybe we help others. Maybe we do some reading, writing. We enjoy laughing, listening to music. I know it's a big one for a lot of people. There's a lot of different ways to deal with stress. You have to find the ones that work best for you. I can post this link for you guys. This is a great little video to watch. The guy who created this video does a good job of explaining our stress response and maybe in different situations. So I will post this in Google Classroom along with this pre-recorded lesson for you guys to watch. Again, great link. If you don't see it when you get through the note guide, I encourage you to watch it. Like I said, a lot of great information. That wraps up our stress notes. If you guys have any questions, shoot me an email. Otherwise, a little bit of background there for kind of the stress response and how our body starts to cope with some of those things. Have a great afternoon.